The red Ferrari 488 Spider screamed through the intersection at 40 miles over the speed limit, its engine roaring with the arrogance of someone who believed money could buy immunity from consequences. Behind the wheel, 23-year-old Ethan Blackwell gripped his phone with one hand, arguing loudly with his father's corporate lawyer about his latest drunk driving charge while completely ignoring the pedestrian crosswalk ahead. Ethan had never worked a day in his life, coasting on his father's pharmaceutical fortune and the assumption that his last name could fix any problem his recklessness created. His Instagram account was a monument to excess, private jets, $1,000 bottles of champagne, and a rotating cast of women who tolerated his company for access to his wealth. At 23, he'd already been arrested 6 times, sued twice, and expelled from 3 universities, each incident quietly swept away by his father's legal team and checkbook. The crosswalk signal had just turned white when Maria Santos stepped carefully into the street, her hand protectively cradling her 8-month pregnant belly. At 32, she moved with the deliberate caution of someone carrying precious cargo, her doctor's appointment papers clutched in her free hand. She and her husband Carlos had tried for 7 years to have a baby, enduring 3 miscarriages and countless fertility treatments they could barely afford on. Their combined salaries as a nurse and elementary school teacher, Ethan saw her too, late, or perhaps he saw her in time but was too absorbed in his phone call to care. The Ferrari clipped Maria's hip with enough force to send her sprawling across the asphalt, her medical papers scattering like fallen leaves as she instinctively curled around her unborn child. The sickening thud of impact finally got Ethan's attention. He slammed on the brakes, leaving rubber streaks across the intersection, and jumped out of his car with the irritation of someone whose day had been inconveniently interrupted rather than the horror of someone who'd just struck a pregnant woman. "Are you kidding me right now?" Ethan shouted, his designer sunglasses reflecting the gathering crowd of shocked witnesses. "Do you have any idea how much this car is worth? You can't just walk into traffic." Maria lay on the ground, gasping through pain and terror as she felt wetness spreading across her dress. Blood, water, she couldn't tell which. "My baby," she whispered, her voice breaking with panic. "Please, someone call an ambulance." "My baby." Instead of rushing to help her, Ethan pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of his car's scratched bumper. "This is a custom paint job. Do you know what this is going to cost to fix?" A middle-aged woman knelt beside Maria, pressing her jacket against the bleeding on Maria's arms and speaking in soothing tones while dialing 911. Other witnesses began recording with their phones, capturing Ethan's shocking callousness as he continued to rant about property damage while a pregnant woman lay injured on the pavement. "Sir, you need to get back in your vehicle and wait for the police," called out a man in a construction vest who had witnessed the entire incident. Ethan spun around with the entitled fury of someone unaccustomed to being told what to do. "Do you know who I am? My father owns half this city. I'll have your jobs, all of you!" That's when the motorcycle pulled up. The Harley-Davidson came to a stop at the edge of the crowd with the controlled precision of someone who knew how to handle both machines and crisis situations. The rider who dismounted was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the unmistakable bearing of military training. He wore the uniform of a Marine staff sergeant, his chest decorated with ribbons that spoke of multiple combat deployments and commendations for valor. Carlos Santos had been rushing home from the base where he worked as a drill instructor when he'd gotten the frantic call from a witness who'd found his number in Maria's purse. 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to compartmentalize fear and rage, but seeing his pregnant wife on the ground while some rich kid complained about his car triggered something primal and dangerous in his chest. "Maria," Carlos said, dropping to his knees beside his wife with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the steel in his voice. "I'm here, Amor. The ambulance is coming." Ethan, still oblivious to the gravity of the situation, strutted over with his phone still recording. "Finally, someone who looks responsible. Your wife walked right into my car. I hope you have good insurance because this is going to cost—" The words died in Ethan's throat as Carlos slowly rose to his full height. Turning to face him with eyes that had seen warfare and wouldn't be intimidated by a spoiled child in designer clothes, The Marine's uniform told its own story. Combat infantry badge, silver star, Purple Heart, decorations that represented real courage and sacrifice. Concepts entirely foreign to Ethan's world of inherited privilege. "What did you just say about my wife?" Carlos asked, his voice quiet, but carrying the kind of authority that made seasoned Marines stand at attention. For the first time in his entitled life, Ethan felt genuine fear. This wasn't some college security guard he could intimidate with his father's name, or some police officer he could buy off with connections. This was a United States Marine who had earned every ribbon on his chest through blood, sweat, and the kind of service that put others before self. I didn't know she was," Ethan stammered, suddenly aware that his usual bluster wouldn't work here. "You didn't know she was what? Human?" Carlos stepped closer, and Ethan instinctively backed toward his Ferrari. "You hit my pregnant wife with your car and your first concern was paint scratches?" The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the commotion, and several people were now recording the confrontation. Ethan could see his future playing out in viral videos and tomorrow's headlines. "Millionaire's son attacks pregnant military wife." "Look, this is all a big misunderstanding," Ethan tried, his voice cracking with panic. "I can pay for her medical bills, whatever she needs." "Money's not an issue." Carlos's expression grew even more dangerous. "You think money fixes what you did? You think you can buy your way out of nearly killing my unborn child?" The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing, followed closely by 2 police cars. As paramedics rushed to Maria's side, checking her vital signs and preparing her for transport, Carlos never took his eyes off Ethan. "Sir, I'm Officer Martinez," said the lead policeman, approaching carefully after assessing the situation. "We need to get statements from everyone involved." "He hit my wife," Carlos said simply, his military bearing evident even in his distress. "She was in the crosswalk with the signal. He was on his phone, speeding." Officer Martinez had worked this beat for 15 years and recognized both the Ferrari's license plate and its owner. The Blackwell name usually meant complications, lawyers, and charges that mysteriously disappeared. But the officer also recognized the ribbons on Carlos's chest and knew he was dealing with something different this time. As Maria was loaded into the ambulance, Carlos prepared to follow, but not before turning back to Ethan one final time. "You want to know who I am?" he said, his voice carrying across the intersection so everyone could hear. "I'm Staff Sergeant Carlos Santos, United States Marine Corps. I've served 3 combat tours protecting the rights of people like you to live free from consequences. But today, you're going to learn that freedom doesn't mean freedom from responsibility." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. "And if anything happens to my wife or my child because of your recklessness, money won't protect you from the kind of justice Marines understand." Ethan stood frozen in the intersection as the ambulance pulled away, Carlos riding alongside his wife, while police officers took statements from witnesses who had recorded everything. His phone buzzed with notifications. The video was already spreading across social media, his face clearly visible, his callous words captured for posterity. For the first time in his privileged life, Ethan Blackwell understood that some lines couldn't be uncrossed. Some consequences couldn't be bought off, and some men couldn't be intimidated. He'd spent 23 years believing his father's money made him untouchable, but he'd just learned that real power comes from serving something greater than yourself, and real justice comes from people willing to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. 2 hours later, as Carlos sat in the hospital waiting room while doctors worked to ensure his wife and child would survive, Ethan sat in a jail cell for the first time in his life. His father's lawyers powerless against the weight of video, evidence, and public outrage. Sometimes, it takes a collision with reality to show us who we really are, and sometimes that reality wears the uniform of someone who has already proven their worth in ways money can never measure.